thanks to you all for joining. We're going to talk about REF2029, specifically how the goalposts have widened to include an element of engagement that was not previously in it before. So I'm really delighted to have with me here John Petrovsky from the UK REF team, who is head of REF policy and is one of the key people who is designing REF as we know it today. And we have Claire Donovan, research professor at the University of Greenwich, who is a long-time impactologist who has a very large experience with research assessment exercises such as REF. And Leslie Patterson, who is a knowledge exchange and impact consultant from Mesh Associates, formerly the head of public engagement with research at the University of Oxford, where I first met her some years ago. So an interesting panel here coming at this topic from a number of angles. I would just say to some people in the room, with a certain amount of apologies, but I understand that, of course, REF, the Research Excellence Framework, is an incredibly British thing that means something to us. And if you are one of our colleagues from Ireland or from Helsinki or from Germany or from Italy, you may be in the other room, or you may be confused. But I think that from my conversations this morning with Tilman from Tübingen, I know that even if the REF is a particularly UK thing, increasingly research assessment exercises where they exist are incorporating elements of impact. And so if it's not reached you yet, it's going to come your way at some point. So I hope this is interesting to you as well. So, John, I wonder if I could start with you. So, we spoke about how this is not a changing of the goalpost, a moving of the goalpost, it is a widening of the goalpost. I wonder if you could just start by setting the scene about what are these changes to REF 2029? What is the kind of public state of affairs that we're aware of now? And just give us a sense of where have these changes come from? What is the REF team and UKRI and Research England and the other funding bodies from the devolved nations, what is the direction of travel? What is the intention here? Where are we trying to get to and driven by these changes?
Sure, thank you, and thanks everyone. It's nice to see you. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think I don't think I'm personally kind of leading the development of the policy for this exercise. Actually, we're trying to do that in collaboration and through engagement and actually learn from all the expertise that's already in the sector. So that's very much our approach. I guess this harks back a few years actually to the evaluation of REF 2021 and to the development work that led into the initial decisions for the forthcoming REF. And as part of that, there was a big programme of evaluation and of engagement and consultation. And that set out some kind of high-level objectives for this next exercise. And I think the key one to say is to not just focus on the extraordinary impact, the sort of show-stopping impact. Yes, that's really important, and yes, those are great things, and it's amazing resources amazing things that have been done throughout the country. But actually, it's really important to recognise all the ordinary kind of impacts and all the engagement that builds the way, sets the foundations for those large, show-stopping impacts. So I think that was the key philosophy that came out of all that development work around the sort of impact agenda, and meant that we changed the assessment element to be called engagement and impact to kind of reflect that breadth and that broader conceptualisation of what excellence is. So that's one of the key things. I think another thing I think is really interesting was this sort of line in the initial decisions, which I didn't write. I turned up after the initial decisions and I had to interpret them and try and figure out what they mean in a sort of a changing context, to be honest, and quite a challenging situation in the sector. And that was that we should consider what rigour means in relation to engagement and impact. And that was suggested that might be an assessment criterion for this exercise. So those are the two big things I think are conceptually pushing forward this REF, and maybe that's a good point for me to hand.
Yeah, great, thank you. And I wonder if, Claire, so REF has sort of evolved out of originally the RAE, and then it's continued to evolve over the years. Could you give us a sense of what does good impact look like? What is the sort of gold standard of what the REF is trying to fish out of universities, and what does that look like?
Okay, thank you, Andrew. You also stole my thunder with impactologist, but I shall bring that. I'm really joking. Okay, so I was asked to speak a bit about, well, what is the gold standard when we're thinking about engagement in the context of broader impact? And so I'll say a little bit about that. And we were talking earlier about how do you go about assessing engagement and impact really well? And then we talked about, actually, how should you not go about doing it? So I can talk about that now, or you can stop me and I can talk about it later. Do we have the backdrop as well? But if not, don't worry. Okay, so why add engagement to the REF? Well, we've heard it straight from, I was going to say the horse's mouth. That's not very nice, is it? So, no, straight from the main person in the know. But looking at the background reading, there's a sense in various publicly available documents that in terms of thinking about impact and things like impact case studies, is there a sense of distributing quite a substantial, element of funding due to luck? How does impact happen? Where do all the, where is engagement in it? And so I think it's more to encourage a strategic approach to impact that includes engagement. A lot of this has been going on anyway, and a lot of this may or may not have gone forward, for example, as impact case studies. But I think in terms of encouraging the sector, if we're thinking more about what is good engagement and how does that link to impact? I guess the thinking is that if we're more engagement aware as an academic, as a sector, then we're more likely to have more impact and hopefully better impact. So I think that's my take on it. Why add engagement to the REF? There's evidence, so with my impactologist hat on, evidence shows that that research that is co-produced with research users, stakeholders, beneficiaries is more likely to have impact. And the more involved beneficiaries are in the whole research process, there's the more likelihood, it's been shown, of enduring and meaningful impact. So ideally, there might be something called Mode 2 research, with Mode 1 being sort of basic blue skies, Mode 2 being applied. And that would be something that's problem-oriented, transdisciplinary, and involves a range of academic and non-academic people within the research team. Or, I mean, that's kind of a gold standard. Another one would be participatory research with beneficiaries. And we have from the person from the DWP in the session previously about the real importance of engagement in terms of creating impact. It's also engagement and leading to impact is more effective if stakeholders or beneficiaries, etc., are involved from the very beginning, and that helps to ensure relevance. And this is co-production, which again was mentioned in the previous session, and that very much is the gold standard. And it also means you have existing networks, you know that research is relevant for them, and they're there to be your advocate and pump prime their network about results. I'll just quickly, so a bit of a flashback all the way back to 2017, and I had a paper published called For Ethical Impactology, and we think sort of responsibility ethics is very central to thinking about engagement and impact. I can coin the term there, impactology, to talk about impactologists, which are a new breed, a new profession of people looking at impact. I've got two lovely impactologists from my university sitting over there as well. But I also coined the term committing metricide. So in terms of how not to do impact, I'll do this quite quickly. So how not to assess or measure engagement and impact. Okay, metricide. Only use metrics and believe that one size fits all, and just use anything that's easily available. It's fine. For simplicity, have a really rigid and a really narrow definition of what engagement and impact is. This is if you want to do it really badly, and preferably defined by very remote remote impactologist without any consultation with the academic community. Insist on only 4-star publications to be underpinning the research, the impact, the engagement. Focus, there's so much impact around, just focus on economic impact. That'd be great. Do not be holistic, do not be reflexive, use dodgy and simplistic indicators and metrics simply because you can and it looks quite convincing. Ignore stakeholders, nearly done. Question the validity and the quality of research involving non-scientists. Wow. In its design and execution, ban co-production, dismiss narratives as fairy tales and qualitative data as subjective and weak. Think of engagement as just dissemination at the end of a research project. Stakeholders will love to be surprised by what you've come up with, and use power to pursue your agenda and ignore stakeholder or beneficiary needs. So that is definitely how not to do it.
Thank you very much. It's interesting there, actually, that a couple of things you honed in on there were that idea of, you talked about the power and the power that researchers have vis-a-vis the research users or other stakeholders, and also I'm getting that sense of good ethical practice, essentially. And I wondered if I could just come back to you, John, and is there an element to these changes that is driven by this desire to see a greater attention paid to the ethics behind impact, and to ensure that this neologism, I think it's grimpact, the idea that all impact need not necessarily be beneficial. Sometimes it will be, it may be impactful, but it may be negative. And I just wondered if you could talk a bit about the REF team's view on that, and to what extent that has informed the changes that have been made.
Sure, yeah, thank you. Without announcing policy before we're there, I guess I can reflect some of the conversations we've had around this kind of area. And I think, so I said before that we talked about the initial decisions for the REF saying that we might think about rigour in the exercise and as an assessment criterion. We did a policy deep dive with a range of participants, and we really tried to explore what that meant and what rigour meant in relation to impact. And I think it was the views of the participants in the deep dive, which we were a wide range of different professions and disciplines and institutions, that it was talking about how you do impact responsibly. And I think that does link to that kind of the ethics, integrity, and those kind of questions. But also recognising that in some circumstances, it's really, really, really important. If you're working with certain communities, and in other circumstances, it won't be much space to actually think about that, and it might be in a commercial space or something like that, where actually the responsible side of it doesn't seem quite as an important emphasis as it does in other areas. So, yeah, it was a really good discussion. I wouldn't say that the policy's set on that, but it's definitely part of the ongoing thinking, I would say.
Great, thank you. So, Leslie, let me come to you. You've worked sort of across knowledge exchange and impact and communications, of course. I wonder if you could give a little bit of a sense of what sort of variety of things could the enormous sort of smorgasbord of types of impact that there are, especially when you're looking at different disciplines and then how and how they inevitably focus on different things and different types of impact.
Thank you. And just to let you know, actually, there's actually a REF that takes place in Hong Kong. There you go, with their 9 public universities. And as we know, the guidance isn't out yet, but I, for one, certainly welcome the acknowledgement and the recognition of engagement coming into the categorisation, so it is being engagement and impact. So I had a chat with a Wellcome Trust buddy, an old Wellcome Trust buddy, who'd just come back from Australia, in which she worked in a university there for 10 years. And actually, she feels for Australia, actually, they went straight on to research impact, while us in the UK, we had a good active 15 years of talking about funding, pushing engagement, talking about engagement culture change, doing loads of engagement, before the research impact agenda became really big. So we had that joy and that privilege of doing that. While in Australia, they've kind of jumped straight to research impact. And she feels actually there's something missing. There's a kind of foundation missing. There's something missing there. And we know that impact doesn't leap out of, from anything, from nowhere. So I really like the fact that we've acknowledged that it is engagement and impact. But as I was chatting to Michael and my fellow panellists when we had a chat about this session online, I think it's also good whenever you're having an impact session just to stop and remind ourselves what we mean by impact and what impact looks like and the different types of impact. So I said I would gladly take on that role, and I just wanted to share with you, so one of my favourite impact frameworks is the ESRC impact framework. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And it's just a little reminder, and I've actually adapted it so that because it's obviously very social sciences focused, and I've reinterpreted it so I think it covers all disciplines. And there's basically 3 key areas, and it's conceptual impact. So that's effectively changing how people think or feel. So that can be changing understanding, awareness, attitudes, values, reframing debates, getting people to ask different questions, so on and so forth. The next one is capacity building. And that's changing what people, communities, organisations, or even nations can do. So that's in terms of, building their knowledge, their skills, their networks, so on and so forth. And then the other one is instrumental impact. And that's changing what people, communities, organisations, or again, nations actually do. So that's changing behaviour, shaping legislation, changing policy, development of services and products, so on and so forth. And I just wanted to I think it's all good for us to remind ourselves actually how broad impact can be. Because sometimes I think we can end up having, putting the blinkers on and forgetting how broad and diverse it is. And the other thing we were talking about earlier, actually, is there's still, and I do understand it, why there is disciplinary kind of, across the different disciplines, there are more favoured forms of impact than others. So I was on the engineering sub-panel for REF2029, loves commercialisation, innovation, product development. Not that much public engagement, unfortunately. Even though I used to be the head of public engagement of the Royal Academy of Engineering for 10 years, I know how much good, impactful, meaningful public engagement happens through engineering. And the same with social sciences and policy. And certainly when I was, my days in Oxford, there was a cracking public engagement impact case study that didn't get shortlisted. I think because it wasn't policy focused, even though it had brilliant evidence and so on. So I'm really hoping as we go on that there's going to be less kind of disciplinary favouritism for certain impact types and that we get more diversity. And I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. And perhaps I could just ask, in terms of the engagement element of that, how do you expect engagement to be incorporated into those sorts of things? So we had a word that was mentioned earlier, which is co-production. I'll come back to you, John, on this as well, but perhaps is the idea that we're going to see involvement of non-academics, people outside of the university, publics, may I use that academic term, more earlier in the process of research to incorporate their views. Let me take a step back. When I think of public engagement, I'm a journalist, well, I was, and when I think of public engagement versus the kind of engagement that journalists provide through the media, I think of, science fairs, that kind of thing, that sort of reeling in the public to talk about things that are interesting, and inevitably that would involve some changing of minds, some broadening of horizons, but it doesn't feel like the kind of engagement that would lead to research or inform research. So obviously there's something much more fundamental about the types of engagement we're talking about. So what would engagement look like in that respect? Is it all about co-production and involving people earlier in the process?
So, forgive me, I'm going to give you one more framework to give you my answer. And that is, I'm sure a number of you will be familiar with the participatory spectrum. And so that starts off with kind of inform and inspire, that you might think more traditional journalism does, high reach, perhaps lower significance, through to consultations, that's listening to people, involving people, through to collaboration, and then the final one being empowerment. And that can be empowerment in terms of actually it's community-led research, which UKRI, of course, and the public engagement team are definitely funding and supporting, and it's definitely going that way. Sometimes people put a gold standard on, it's got to be empowerment, community-led, it's got to be this deliberative, participatory research. I totally disagree with that. I think you can have an absolute gold standard, inform and inspire, brilliant communications campaign, media-led campaign that really leads to brilliant impact. Across the whole spectrum, they're all gold. If you do them well, they're all gold standards to me. And it all depends on your research, the impact, and the objectives that you're after. That said, the field is moving on to a lot more kind of, getting publics, communities, partners involved a lot more early in the process and seeing the benefits of that. But I would always want to see them valued equally. It's just depending on how well you do it. That's what I really want them to do.
John, can I just ask you to add anything to that in terms of, from your perspective, I understand the policy is still in motion and yet to be nailed down, but is there an expectation of what this engagement in respect of impact engagement, that would look like?
I think that's very much a developing thing at the moment. But what I would say is that we've appointed a research diversity advisory panel, which actually covers impact as well. And I guess the intention is that we really scrutinise and think about the different types of engagement and impact and what that looks like. And we're going to challenge our different sort of panels to actually be thorough in their thinking about how this might occur in the different disciplinary areas, and try and, I suppose, work in the way that you're describing and really embed that into the exercise. Yeah. So I can't really say much more than that now, but other than it's very much ingrained in our thinking.
Is co-production a big focus?
It's a big focus. I mean, I guess it's part of it. Yeah. I think it's a big focus of the way that we work in the REF team, if that counts. And it will be in there in some sense, but I think it's, probably more than I can go into at this point.
Claire.
Yeah.
Thank you. And just to add to that, there's a lot of field and discipline specific considerations. So it's not the one size fits all, which is the bad way to do things. I forgot about this. Should I quickly mention this? It's sort of quite relevant. There's only the one slide. Oh, right, okay. So if we're thinking about, okay, we've got engagement, which is potentially a new element alongside impact, how are we going to think about that, and how potentially might that be assessed? Or how does that reflect the thinking, the idea behind the whole exercise in the first time? So we've got 4 possibilities logically. So first is no engagement and no impact. Okay, I think we can all agree that's not what REF will be looking for. We then have the idea of impact, but with no engagement. And I guess we could think, for example, of excellent previous REF impact case studies, for example, that are fantastic, but don't have an engagement element. So we don't know if it's going to be impact case studies, we don't know what form it's going to take, but that would pose the question, with something that has no impact, but lots of engagement in terms of a group's work, how would we value that? And also, at the bottom, we have got impact and engagement, and obviously that's a great thing. But the question is, does that have to look the same for the whole sector in every area? And another way to look at it also is, it was mentioned earlier, about not looking at the heroic sort of impact case studies, but what is the everyday work? So we might call it mundane impact or everyday engagement. What is it that goes on within universities and in terms of building long-term relationships? So, for example, co-production is often with vulnerable communities, and often there has to be a massive amount of trust, which takes a long time to build these relationships. So there's those two dimensions. There's the actual impact that happens, but what is the culture that can help facilitate engagement and impact?
Yeah, thank you. I really like that conceptualisation, and I think maybe foundational engagement rather than mundane might be we frame it perhaps. Yeah, no, I'm only joking, obviously, but I think that, as you said at the start, we don't want to shift the goalposts entirely on this, and all the excellence that has been excellence in the past we still want to recognise, but we want to broaden that conceptualisation, and so that there's space to recognise excellence in across all these different forms that are, well, maybe not the top one, but the others. So that rings true for me. So
Thank you. I'm conscious that unfortunately we're going to lose Leslie in a short period of time because she has to get back to Oxford. But thank you very much for what we've heard, and I'd love to toss it open for questions. Let's have 1, 2, 3. Let's start there.
Hi, I'm Robin. I'm from the University of Portsmouth. The thing behind is really interesting. I think, for me, impact and engagement, they coexist. They're not mutually exclusive things, because you can't achieve impact without some form of engagement, whether that be a communications campaign that's done quite well, or research, participant-led research. And also impact, engagement you can't have without the impact. Whatever engagement you do, whether it be small or large, will always deliver impact. So having those two kind of separated and considered as separate entities in any REF, I don't agree with it. I feel like at the end of the day, a successful campaign that's been driven by PR and media will always deliver on impact. So I just wanted to kind of agree with it. They should both coexist.
Hello, I'm Caroline at the University of Oxford. What could research communication professionals, so those of us who will probably be writing the REF case studies, how can we be best preparing now for when the time comes?
Hi, just in response to your reflections, Robin. And so one thing I would say is you can have an impact case study. There's no points for impact in the REF. You can produce research, publish it, and not lift a finger. Someone can take your research and do something amazing with it. Now, they've engaged. So I know what you're saying. Some engagement has to happen, but it doesn't have to be the researcher. And there are REF impact cases. There is 0 points for effort. None, honestly. There's REF impact case studies that you can go and look, and I'm sure most of you know that REF impact case studies are all publicly available, and you can search for them, and you can find impact case studies in which the research team has done nothing but publish the research. But another organisation, external partner, has taken that research, they've used that research, and they've created impact. Brilliant. And there's 4-star ones there. And the other thing I would disagree with, I do think you can do engagement without impact, and there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, the people, I work with a lot of researchers, academics, and actually one thing I really encourage them to do is not fear failure, is go out. What I want you to do is do engagement really well with rigour. do best practice, do it really well, but it might not work. So I'm working with a researcher, philosopher in King's College London. She got so far with this policy work and then stuff changes. And then they didn't produce the guidelines and the regulations that they promised they did. And that is nothing to do with her fantastic engagement process that she did. So you can have engagement without impact as well.
Is that with the engagement side of things? I meant in the sense of whatever you do will ultimately have an impact on someone.
Yes.
Small or large, you might not have achieved what you set out to do, but they'll
Yeah.
your work won't.
Something will definitely change, without a doubt. There will always be learning, absolutely. And that's one thing, obviously when you're doing evaluation, especially when we get to the pointy end of the ref, as an evaluator, what I get sad about is that everything becomes about evidencing and not learning. And there's always learning to be had. And sometimes you just got to bide your time. And actually that King's researcher, I know that opportunity will come back up again. She just has to bide her time and she will get impact there.
Tips for Caroline?
So how to work with your researchers to help prepare. Yeah, so I mean everything it's all about planning right now and thinking. Obviously you'll want to, so I typically, again, when I'm as an external consultant, I'll interview the academics, find out about what they're doing, what research impacts they've got already, what evidence and data they've got already. And also, because again, impact literacy, we need it to improve. Very often they'll have impact that they won't even know. And you'll know because you've got the expertise in it. And that's just amazing when that happens. That happens with loads of Hong Kong researchers because actually the impact literacy isn't as good there. Really senior ones going, I created a company and they've got 2 jobs and that's impact. And it's like, yeah, no, honestly, that's it. And their faces just light up. So that's the first stage. And then the next stage is thinking about, are they going to, is there still impact going on in the impact planning? And then from that, having a think what evidence and data can be collected and doing that on a matrix, actually, I would, and being able to track that and thinking about it. But if there is impact ongoing, that's the best thing. I mean, impact, trying to gather evidence of impact, you can absolutely do it. Many people do, and this will happen again in REF2029. Doing it retrospectively is a nightmare. You can do it, but if you can get it embedded, it's so much more effective and efficient, and you can really build it into your engagement process, actually, in terms of having, so like you're working with a partner, have a reflective session every now and again. Don't just talk about delivery. Say how things are going for your partner. Has there been any benefits for you? What can we do better? That kind of thing. So it's just this ongoing journey.
Thank you. Just to add to that, that was reminded me of my colleague Matt Warren from Universal Impact, who, when some of the first work they did was helping universities with REF impact case studies for 2021. And just taking a very sort of journalistic approach to that, that's exactly what they did. They sort of spoke to the researcher, I produced this, and we worked with these guys, but we don't really know what happened to it. So Matt just went along and rung up a whole bunch of people and said, you've worked with these people at Aston, and what did they have to say about it? And they were like, oh my God, it's been completely transformative. We've done this with it, we've done that. But no one had gone back to them and asked. And so that vital information was just a nugget that had never got picked up. And it was just because Matt's a journalist, he's like, well, obviously I'll just talk to people because that's what we do for a living. It turns out, talk to people, there's loads of good info there, just waiting to be collected. Sorry for my tangent. John, sorry.
Thank you. So is it okay to respond to the question? So I'm being a bit provocative with that one. I think that if we looked at what on the face of it seems like a case study that has impact but no engagement, if we actually unpack the process, I'm sure that there's plenty that has been going on there. And I think that moving towards including engagement is sort of allowing room for that, and also being able to learn from each other about what works and what's been best practice in various ways. So that's a really good observation, thank you. And here, how do we prepare? When Australia was first thinking about doing something like a REF, a Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Wollongong in Australia, it's a real place, it's Dr. Monty Python sketch, said, let's give all academics an orange box. I've got an orange folder because I wasn't really going to bring a box all across London, but just for it to put it on their desks. I mean, I don't really have a desk. Who has a desk? But if you have a desk, have that orange box. And every time you do something, so for example, if you go to a workshop that's with research users or with elements of public engagement, or if your work is picked up in the media, for example, anything that happens, put it in that orange box, because the point being made, it's a nightmare retrospectively to try and put that story together. Or it might be an email that you've had from someone who was interested and that led to something. Or it might be at that conference, there was amazing conversation over lunch, which led to something. It's sort of like, it's your breadcrumbs. It's part of the evidence trail of what kind of engagements happened. And it could, of course, be a virtual orange box in terms of something on the cloud or an email folder. So I think congratulations, you win the wonderful orange. This is a magic one, so whoever holds this will have amazing engagement. So, yes.
Yeah, I'll just quickly make a comment on that sort of relationship between engagement and impact. Yeah, I think that we have talked about it, and that we think, and the research, and we think it's a sort of, it's quite a complex relationship, but I don't think they are siloed things, and I think we do need to avoid that in the exercise. I think the way we're thinking about it is a sort of a triangle, a multi-directional triangle, where actually the impact might be really great in one version of that triangle, or the engagement might be a really large part of that sort of process in another part of the triangle, but it's going to look different, and we need to create space in the exercise that recognises all of that. So, yeah, I agree with you, yeah.
Thank you. John. The black shirt, glasses.
Hi there, I'm Jean Malone, University of Greenwich, Impactologists Alliance, member of. I'm just interested in your comments, probably more so Jonathan, I suppose, but probably everyone, in terms of the sort of ever-increasing entanglement, I suppose, between what the KEF does or is trying to do and what the REF is trying to do by looking specifically at engagement, and also in the discipline level evidence statements for engagement and impact, how we're looking at environment for nurturing knowledge exchange or engagement. They're fairly interchangeable terms. Yeah, so in terms of our everyday work and supporting all of that, we can't look at them separately anymore. We can't look at them as different things. We can't even talk about them as different things, and that's good. I'm just interested in terms of how the frameworks might be tackling that and the thinking surrounding that might be evolving. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a good question. I mean, the KEF is England only and the REF is UK, so I think that we have to think beyond that, which is really important. I think it is really important that they're complementary and they sit together, and that they don't create competing tensions at least. I think we're still developing the work around the discipline level statements, but that's definitely part of our thinking. So I can't say much more about it now, other than that is, yeah, definitely part of the consideration. I don't know if there's anyone else who...
Leslie, do you want to have a word there before you go? Is that
About the KEF and the REF?
about Jean's question there? Yeah.
So it was about the KEF and the REF? Yeah. Yeah, and I always see REF as best in show. And unashamedly, I think best in show. And it'd actually be interesting to see about engagement and impact, if at all, because you can get negative impact. Of course you can. And you should learn from that and understand that and realise why there was, harm caused, whatever harm may look like. I don't know if we'll ever get to the stage where we'll report it in a REF impact case study, or we should even want to. So I always see REF as best in show, and I always see KEF and KEC as ways in which you can be more honest. Sounds like I'm doing a disservice to the REF. I don't mean it like that. In which you're genuinely looking at how things, your structure, your environment, plans for improving it, and all that kind of thing. And actually, for me, I think it's there to try and take an even more sort of not honest, that's not true, but actually say actually where you can do better as well and where things can be improved.
Warts and all.
What?
Warts and all.
Warts and all, indeed, yeah, for self-reflection and learning and to share together. Yeah, I'm not saying there's not learning in the REF, of course there is, but it is best and show. You do talk about all your positive impacts and your best outputs. You don't talk about the things that you did wrong. I've got to fly, sorry everybody.
Thank you very much, Desi. It's great to have you here. Do you want to say anything? No? Okay. I think we could probably squeeze in one more question. One more question. There we go.
Hi, I'm Helene Murphy, Research Communications Manager at the Open University. I'm just thinking we're now in June 2025 and REF's in 2029. And I'm just wondering how much active planning, this is an exchange session, so I'm just wondering how much active planning are universities doing at the moment to influence that result? In my mind, there are two things. There's the result which influences the QR funding, the amount of funding that we get, but there's also the reputational consequences. And I'm just wondering if universities have started doing that comms planning yet. It's more to the room than to the speakers. Or should we be, as universities, looking at the potential? It seems to me like we should.
Is it ever too early to plan? Yeah. Any responses? I'll come to the panelists. Yeah. I think there's probably a 6-week window after REF 2021, and then it's all back into it again. Any other comments from anyone? Yes.
If I was in charge of a university, I'd be thinking strategically about what is the environment for engagement and impact, and what support can be offered in terms of personnel or structure or vision or environment to make sure that there is an impact enabling culture. We know that there's a lot of difficulty in the sector at the moment, and engagement, as mentioned earlier, is something that can take a very long time, and especially building up relationships and maintaining those. So a declaration of interest, I was part of the policy deep dive. One thing I'd never heard of that came up before was the idea of co-washing. So if we're saying like co-production is very important in certain areas, are we going to see a rise of submissions making it look like there's been co-production, or might have gone in and done something perfunctory? So I think it's also about, we want to, there's the whole ethical dimension to consider, and that would be the opposite. So I think, obviously, there's the comms side, which I can't speak about, but there's the preparation. And I think, diverting resources in that direction would be a smart move.
I mean, there's not a huge amount I can say, I suppose. I can't speak for universities. But I'd say that, the REF is supposed to be a celebration of excellence and recognition of excellence. And I suppose in an ideal world, you'd have institutions, celebrating and submitting all the amazing work that's happening, and that's what we want to see. So I guess it's hard to, be yourselves as institutions and to submit the excellent work that you're doing. It's an easy thing to say, obviously. I know it's far more complicated than that. But, I can't really talk about on the ground, I guess, quite so much.
Great. Oh, all right. Very much the last one, and then we're going to break for lunch.
It's just a follow-up comment on the co-washing. I think language is really important and definitions are really important. So obviously we had the definition of impact earlier, and the framework around different levels of engagement and participatory. But people do define engagement and co-production and in very different ways, and they might interpret it in very different ways. So I think one of the things I'd say is language is going to be really important for the REF, and being really clear around what those definitions are. And I just wondered if anything came out of that deep dive around that, because I think one of the comments I've heard is around the definition of rigour and whether that's the right term to define engagement, if that makes in the process of developing impact. So I just wondered if there was anything to expand on that around language.
I know what the answer's going to be.
I mean, yeah, language was a really big part of the discussion at the deep dive. There's probably not much I can share with you in terms of specifics to say it's really a fundamental focus, and we're going to be working with the panels to think about how we talk about it in relation to different disciplinary areas. We have our Research Diversity Advisory Panel who are proactively thinking about how do we think about the diversity of impact and engagements and kind of set that out in an appropriate kind of way. And yeah, in relation to rigour, I think that I don't think people really connected with that as a term, I'd say, generally, is my reflection. So I think there is some development work to do around what that means and then actually how we apply that and where we apply that in the exercise. But yeah, I agree, we've got to be absolutely careful about the incentives that we create and unintended consequences. It's very complex, but thankfully we've got amazing people in the sector to help us kind of get that in the right shape. So yeah, good point.
That's a note to leave it on. Thank you very much to our speakers, and thank you very much for your questions.